Well, I finally have another great sleep expert on the podcast today, Molly McGlocklin, and she's going to share some amazing tips on how to optimize our sleep. But more particularly, she's going to cover why in the world are women over 50 waking up in the middle of the night, and how can we stop this so we can actually experience sleep like we did when we were 20 and 30. So we have already had some great sleep researchers and biohackers on the podcast who've given their perspectives on what the research is showing and what works in the biohacking world. But Molly has taken a real deep dive and a practical dive that these people have not taken. So I'm really excited to share with you what she has to say. And Molly is such an expert because she's not only dealt with her own struggles with sleep, but she's created a whole business around it and coached so many other people with her knowledge and her expertise. And she's the founder of the Sleep is a Skill website. And she's got some programs out there, but she's also the host of the Sleep is a Skill podcast, which you all have to go and listen to after this episode. And if you're not already following her, and this is where she interviews other experts on sleep. So you got it all consolidated in one place. And what Molly does is that she uses technology, she uses accountability and behavioral change to help everyone optimize their sleep. And she's trained in behavioral techniques from the nonverbal group and Beyond Tells. And she also has a degree in psychology from Syracuse. And she also has experience with a focus group that's examined the continuous blood glucose monitors and Oura Ring data on sleep. So I'm really interested to see what that's all about. And today we're going to focus on the issues of women in their 50s and 60s and 70s and what their issues are with sleep and some of the benefits and risks that come with both ends of the spectrum. And before we meet Molly, I have to read the fancy disclaimer that this information and opinions provided in the podcast by Sleep is a Skill, LLC, it's also known as SIAS, are not medical advice, do not create any type of medical relationship, and unless expressly stated, do not reflect the opinions of SIAS, its affiliates, subsidiaries, or sponsors, or the hosts of any guest's employer or affiliated professional organizations. And no person should act or refrain from acting on the basis of content provided in any podcast on her website without first seeking appropriate medical advice and counseling. And no information provided in any podcast or on her website should be used as a substitute for medical advice and counseling. SIAS expressly disclaims any and all liability relating to any actions taken or not taken based on any or all contents of this website and any podcast, including mine. So now without further ado and having that out of the way, let's meet Molly McLaughlin. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was such a great introduction and even so thorough with the disclaimer. I appreciate all that. Thank you. Thank you. And it's really great to be here.
Awesome. I would love to dive right in and talk to you about sleep and why it's so important, especially for women in over 50, of the older generation. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yes. So number one, I can certainly share that, so people are related to the fact that the person speaking right now, this really all got created out of solving my own issues with my own sleep. So I share that because no matter where you might be as a listener right now with your own sleep, no matter if you're struggling night after night, certainly like I was, and really for me, it was my rock bottom moment in my life. So it really had me change everything in order to restore this area. And it really took some, kind of dark nights of the soul to get up under what was going on there. And from that place has transformed so much of my life for the better. So I'm actually incredibly grateful for what I did go through with my sleep. So I share all that so that no matter where you might be with your sleep, that I think there are certainly things that we can learn from the symptoms that are coming out for us being in the realm of sleep in this case. And with that we can actually make a tremendous difference in our health and our life by virtue of improving this area. So no matter where you might be, I'm making this message that there's an opportunity to up level in various ways in your sleep. And we'll get into what those look like. But particularly, yes, you were pointing to a very underserved area and group, which actually and specifically is that area of women. I actually even find from 40 and up in particular too, of being another underserved area. And that even relates to things like sleep apnea and not being properly. And I know we had some kind of back conversations with that in conversations that you and I had. But so it's a very underserved group of women that are not being properly screened for things like that. That's kind of one of the most common or well-known sleep disorders. And of course, there's many others, but that is a group that's not being tended to. And to your point around the entire title of this, the stop waking up to go pee in the middle of the night problem, that is an area that time and time again is just sort of being blown off. And there are spectrums to this. So I don't want to confuse anyone. It's not as if it's a problem to wake up maybe once or twice throughout the night. There are times when that makes sense and that is perfectly normal. So we don't want people to develop complexities around certain things that actually are normal, but then finding the spectrum and when we should start taking action.
Yeah, you said it so great. Yeah, in terms of the women around the age of 40, that's when we hit perimenopause. And
Yes.
and that's, included, when we talk about women over 50 and menopause. And in fact, yeah, it backtracks and starts way earlier. So, and that's when a lot of
Sure.
sleep problems can start happening as well. And there's this, people might go, oh, well, it's just aging. I'm getting older and it's normal. And like you said, there are things that are normal and there are things that are not normal that are maybe common, but they're not normal. And that's where I want to fix and also make clear to people, maybe things are normal, it's not that big of a deal. And there's not going to be any damage, long-term damage physiologically to your body. But when we talk about older women, I want to focus a little bit on the importance of sleep, because in my master's of gerontology, I did a paper, which I think I mentioned to you, is looking at sleep disturbances or sleep disorders and women going through menopause and diseases. And there's so much research out there. It can be kind of scary, how, women going through menopause, these hormonal changes, well, we do have this disrupted sleep, but the lack of sleep, the lack of quality sleep, sleep apnea, sleep, all different kinds of sleep issues that women are having, where, either you're not being able to fall asleep again, or you're waking up in the middle of the night, and how this is relating to dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes. It was just, the list went on and on and on. You could find so much research out there. So I wanted to make that connection in my paper, and it's very bi-directional is what I found, right? Sometimes you have these diseases and then you don't have the good sleep because of the disease. And sometimes these diseases may just be, or a lack of sleep or poor sleep quality is contributing to triggering some of them. So what have you been finding in your research into sleep and older women and diseases? What are we more vulnerable to when we don't have good sleep quality?
Oh, 100%. And I appreciate you sharing the context from what you found in your research, because it is just such an underserved topic. So, one, I can also pan out and share another reason why this is particularly important for women to cue into, and to the point of those kind of cusp years, the years of going through perimenopause, menopause, and then there's some question marks about postmenopause, and I'll explain. But one is that a lot of the things that we can speak to that can help support sleep are around in training your rhythms. And one of the most common rhythms that most people are connected to are their circadian rhythm, that 24-hour rhythm. And so we can certainly, speak to some general principles and takeaways there. But there's also the infradian rhythm, which does not get as much press. And that is specific to women, because that is, as opposed to a 24-hour cycle and rhythm, our infradian rhythm is operating on about a month cycle. And that is related to our menstrual cycle if we are of menstruating age. And then there's even questions of, is there still some sort of cycle happening post menopause. Now that gets into some kind of exploratory domain, but certainly we're clear that throughout menstruation and then throughout menopause that we're exploring is what's happening with that cycle and how much that can play a huge role in our sleep. And the more educated we are on that topic, the less mystified we become when there's certain periods when we are just going through such, we're up against a wall to get the sleep that we need and then what to really do about it. So that's an important rhythm for us to be connected to. So if you are of menstruating age and listening, know that there are a lot of resources in this area, but one just general takeaways are that within that rhythm, there's certain breakdowns that you can have, but certainly knowing that on the first half of your cycle, that on average, we tend to, even objectively, our measurements tend to be more robust or able to recover in certain ways, and that how that affects our sleep. So what that looks like is you might have lower heart rate on the first half of your cycle, higher HRV, heart rate variability. You might have a lower respiratory rate, your body temperature tends to be lower. Some of these indicators that you're able to be more resilient and kind of recover with ease. So that's on the first half of the cycle. Now, this is wildly blanketed statement I'm just putting in here, but I just want to share with you that these are the commonalities that we see in certain studies. So that first half, and there's much more nuance that you could get into, but around that first half, that's what you can think of. And you want to align your behaviors and workouts and foods and all those things in alignment with that. And your choices, maybe alcohol, to have alcohol, to not have alcohol, coffee, all those things. On the second half of your cycle, that's where you might be more looking at sympathetic dominant. So going towards a more lower HRV, which tends to reflect difficulty recovering. You might have higher heart rate, certainly tend to have higher body temperature in the luteal phase, and then your respiratory rate might be higher. So I'm saying all this because within alignment with that, that tends to all reflect just a bit more stress to the body and more to kind of to help support the ability to recover. And that's really what sleep is, a clear time every single day where you're set aside to recover. And if you are being hindered in that, that's where you want to make your choices mindfully, where it might not make sense to indulge in the extra glass of wine or have the extra cup of coffee or be mindful of certain types of food choices and the timing of all those. So all of that, I say all that because in that second half of your cycle, that's where we often see people have more instances of difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep. And that gets into that waking up repeatedly. You might just be skewing more towards that stress response, a higher cortisol pulse in the early morning hours. So all of these things can make it more difficult to sleep and sleep well and sleep consistently. So this is when we want to support ourselves with the many kind of cortisol flushing activities as possible in those times and prioritize self-care. And that's just one generalized takeaway, but I think that's important for us to realize that we've been really taken out of so many studies for so many decades because of that variability and how much that can affect certainly our sleep, but also all those many other metrics that I just mentioned. So it makes sense for us to learn about this so that we can act differently in alignment with that.
Yeah, that's such amazing information because you know this is for women, particularly if you understand your cycle and you know your cycle, and that just shows the importance of following it, because then you can hack it in certain ways. Like you said, you maybe adjust your diet, your exercise, the timing, and maybe get away with some things, or be aware that you cannot. And so the one thing I really would like to know a little bit more about, in terms of if you have any research that you've done on the types of outcomes of diseases of aging that women in particular, or maybe men, are having because of possibly a lack of sleep or sleep quality.
Yes, absolutely. And I apologize because I think you had pointed to that too, and I don't think I properly answered that. Yes, a huge number of things. We really struggle to find across all genders and across all age groups, we struggle to find an area that is not negatively impacted when you are sleep deprived. And some of the specifics. So Harvard Medical School did a great report where they kind of did a rundown of what they're seeing as a result for people when they are getting fewer than 6 hours of sleep consistently, and some of the biggest categories of areas that we find that are impacted. And of those groups, first off, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cognitive decline, and my favorite, death from any cause, all cause mortality. So that's a big one, right? And then as a bonus, they also found that within that group that people were having chronic or higher levels of cortisol, and then a downstream effect of leptin and ghrelin instability. So certainly difficulty with managing of that glucose and insulin response. So those are some areas that are impacted, but this is so not exhaustive. This is just some really unequivocal groups and categories that we see. And of course, as we are aging, one of the things that I particularly see for women is that they are often going into their doctors with some of their concerns around their sleep deprivation and how they're feeling as a result. And then what seems to be a knee-jerk response is around stress, anxiety, depression, and then it tends to be people going down a path of prescription medications for those things. But we also know that those tend to be very common symptoms of sleep deprivation. Now, it's kind of a chicken or the egg question, but certainly if we do see that when we address sleep difficulties and sleep deprivation, both chronic and acute, then alleviation of those symptoms seem to result. So it's very, very important that we look at those. And then some other elements like attention deficit and lack of productivity and just general malaise, fatigue, all of those things certainly, of course, go up in alignment with our difficulties with our sleep to varying degrees. But those are just some of the things. So what I want to really make the message clear is that if you are struggling with your health, to prioritize sleep in the beginning journeys of this, this can make all the difference in the world for some of your symptoms. But I don't want to oversimplify this too, because often that can be a problem of a health problem and then spilling into sleep as well. So we can get more into that.
You're right. It's so bidirectional, and it's always hard to find where is the root cause with the disease or with the lack of sleep, or perhaps a little bit of both. But I want to clarify for some people who are listening. So you mentioned cortisol, and cortisol is a stress hormone, right? And you need cortisol for certain times of the day, but we don't want to have this chronic cortisol, high levels of cortisol at inappropriate times. So that's a stressor. That's not good. That contributes to disease. And you also mentioned leptin and ghrelin, which are our appetite hormones, and that regulates, how hungry we are or how satiated we are. And then with a poor sleep, well then, we're not making healthy choices, right? Very often, right. Or, we'll wake up feeling like eating, salmon and broccoli, or, we just want to go for something that picks us up. So that's why it's so important to understand that, there's a lot of people out there talking about weight loss or fat loss, burning fat in your sleep. Well, because you're regulating the hormones when you get good sleep, right? You're making proper choices. You're able to burn more fat. You're able to, body's able to function. Like the whole purpose of sleep is what we think it is to rejuvenate, revive, repair, all this stuff. We underestimate the power of it. And so when it comes to diseases, and really, you're depriving yourself of sleep is depriving your body of repairing itself and doing what it needs to do, damage control, right? So it's such an important component, and it's so easy to let it slip away. And that's why I really want to stress the importance of it, without, obviously, if you're an insomniac, I don't want to scare you either, because that could,
yes, it's a fine line. Yes.
Probably backfire.
Yes.
So
you do make an important point, and I should underscore this too, that one of the things that I am grateful for that has been coming out in recent years is a lot more press on what seems to be a the correlation and potentially an idea of a possible causation, but certainly a correlation between sleep deprivation and neurodegenerative disorders. So this is part of the reason why we're seeing a lot more press out there for people of prioritizing sleep, because of the discovery of something called glymphatic drainage, which is with a G, not an L. And glymphatic drainage is that drainage and cleansing property and process of the brain while we're sleeping, specifically in the first half of the night in that deep sleep period. And so that what we've been able to uncover is it seems to be a cleansing process to cleanse out amyloid beta plaques that can build up, that becomes a plaquing process on the brain if they're not flushed out properly each night. And so, many people will complain or are fearful of, are they getting enough deep sleep? And part of that is certainly the experience that they might have post getting a good night of sleep that's deep sleep rich, but also the concerns that they've been hearing about glymphatic drainage. And if you're not going through that deep sleep period, then not being able to properly flush out the toxins left over throughout the course of the day. And then what that could cause both on the short term, as far as just cognitive abilities, but then certainly on the long term, for anyone that's concerned or at risk for some of those neurodegenerative diseases, or just looking to be proactive. So that's another big one. And to your point, we're not trying to say all these things to scare, but instead to underscore and have some reverence for this area that often in the past might have been sort of this afterthought or, a nice to have thing.
You're right. And if anyone is following Alzheimer's disease research, or has a parent who has that, you probably know that there is a beta amyloid plaque buildup in these people, and so they're studying why, why they're having this beta amyloid plaque buildup. If sleep and glymphatic drainage can help with that and remove some extra that we don't need, then why aren't we getting more sleep? And really, I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that when we get good sleep, we function better, right? We think more clearly. We look more beautiful. We don't have bags under our eyes. There's just too many benefits that, we really don't really need this research. Just test it on yourself, right? When you get a good night's sleep, you're sharper. So that's your cognitive function, right? Why, I don't think we take it so seriously sometimes. We really need to prioritize our sleep. And I used to be one of those people who wants to do it all, and I would just say, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead, because it's such a waste of time.
I used to say that too.
Until I learned about glymphatic drainage, and I was like, oh boy, okay, I better get to bed.
Yes. And I mean, that's one of the things that seemed to have been a bit of the wake up call. Certainly Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, has been another wake up call for a number of people. So there is that fine line, because of course, we're not trying to pull it into the realm of performance anxiety and sleep anxiety, and there's sleep phobias and all these things. So, treading that fine line. But I think for the majority of people, because we are asking, and some of the things I ask of people are pretty outside the bell curve of what the average group is doing. So in order to make some of those behavioral changes that are outside of the realm of normalcy, then often we do need to have that commitment. So sometimes it is important to get, what's at stake here. And there's a lot at stake.
Mm-hmm. And so much, it's such an easy fix. Honestly, it's free, and you just need to prioritize it. It don't need, take drugs or pills or anything, pay money, just your time. So I want to have a little bit of focus on why we're waking up to pee at night. Some people say it's getting older, or it's normal, but it can be annoying. And is it because we're waking up because we have to pee, or bladder is full, or are we waking up for something else and go, well, while I'm up, let's just go to the bathroom?
Yeah, great question. And I loved that you titled this conversation, Stop Waking Up to Pee, because I just think it's so relatable. I got actually response to my newsletter for it, just because it's one of the top things that people just struggle with. And it's not just the act of that wake up, but also what can be the spillover to, and now I'm up. now I'm awake for extended periods of time. So you're pointing something really important. And we should distinguish between the fact that, yes, there is an element of normalcy, particularly we do find as we age, and particularly post around 65 seems to be a bit of the call out, that post, that particularly as we get into decades into the later part of our 60s and into our 70s, there seems to be a bit more fragmentation. If it's any consolation, we had a sleep anthropologist on the podcast, and one of the things that he was pointing to was this theory that potentially this could be a way for the elders in certain tribes back in the day. Certainly, this is a historic account, to then bring a new sense of value to the group, because then they could be more sounding the alarm for any sort of danger or people coming into the space or into the tribe. That's a particular theory. Just throwing that out there if there's any solace to that sleep fragmentation. But the reality of that, so that's happening, what do we do about it? One, knowing that it is normal to wake up throughout the course of the night, usually around one, maybe two times throughout the course of the night. One of the big things that we're looking at, and I know that can be frustrating too, to experience that, but we're also looking at how often this is happening, but really importantly, how quickly are we able to fall back asleep post that wake up. And ideally it's around the one time a night. And then if we start getting into multiple, which certainly I have a number of clients that come my way, that it's just time and time and time again throughout the night, and they really feel like they're losing their minds. So I really, really sympathize and understand and hear this. And I've been there too. So with that, what we're looking at is, are you up and then up for a few minutes and then falling back asleep, or is this stretching into half an hour, sometimes then you're up for the rest of the night, and that's where it can get more problematic. So a couple of things. One, looking at some of the root causes of these wake ups can stem from a number of things. One, some of the common top-down reasons can be the least sexy of all of them, but it's a lack of sleep consistency. So you might be going to bed largely around the same time throughout the course of the week. And then maybe things skew on the weekends, and that gets in the category of what's known as social jet lag. But sometimes it's even just on our own. It's our self-created jet lag, or we're watching Netflix or whatever. And so now we're going to bed much later. And then because of that self-created jet lag, we didn't get on a plane, but now everything's sort of skewed out and the body is unclear what time it is and what to be doing when. And that can send a whole hormonal cascade of confusion. So that is one of the more common things that we see. And then that creates more fragmented sleep as we're continuing to adjust every single week with all of that variability. So that's one. But then in addition to that, I mentioned the glucose element and how we did that kind of focus group overlaying Oura Ring data with continuous glucose monitors. And you would be shocked the amount and how common it is that people are having unstable glucose throughout the course of the day and spilling into throughout the course of the night. And how that one of the key kind of features of that is then you can be waking up in the early morning hours, traditionally when you're crashing with your glucose. And then the theories around that being that when that crash is occurring, then the body is kind of creating this adrenaline response. So now that's the type of wakeness that you are now up and really up, because now you've had that surge of type of hormones that now are something's wrong. We need to do something. And that's not conducive at all to getting back to sleep. So that would be one of the areas that I would really encourage most people to look at, because, and so many people are so unaware, particularly people that say, well, I'm healthy and I, what have you. But one of the areas that continuous glucose monitor companies that are looking to make it outside of diabetics is that they're really honing in on what they call, the Peloton demographic, which is the, healthy, really active person. And they're really concerned and willing to make changes in their health. And they are having really unstable glucose throughout the course of the day and night. So taking a look at that, even if you get a continuous glucose monitor from your doctor or from different providers for even a month, that can be so eye-opening. And then you can see what it looks like throughout the course of the night as well. Really fascinating. And often that alone can make a difference. If you do suspect that it might be glucose related, you could test some of these different things that people have tried out to try to stabilize their glucose enough throughout the course of the night. Now, this is very bio individual. Some people are all over the place. And this might, only create a little bit of a band-aid. But some of that looks like having some kind of healthy fats before bed. So it might be like almond butter, or some people do raw honey. Some people will do things like collagen protein, or so different ways that you can bring that in, along with different MCT oils and various things to hopefully stabilize your blood sugar throughout the course of the night. But we don't want to be doing that for the rest of our lives. And that's kind of just a way to check and see, are you sleeping better as a result of that? So that might give you a clue that it is blood sugar related. So taking those steps. But that's another common one. Another one that I see so often is eating late. And it's certainly in alignment with that glucose piece, but it's a timing piece. So if you want to read more about this, a great resource is Circadian Code by Dr. Sachin Pandit of the Salk Institute. Decades of research around how any bite of food is telling the body something about the time that it's operating within. So you want to look at what your first bite and your last bite of food is, and what those times are. And is it consistent, or is it kind of all over the place? But particularly, are you eating later into the evening? And I still even mean, people might say, oh, that's not me. Next, I'm not eating like in bed or anything. But even we're talking 2 hours, 3 hours. And sometimes I've seen people make really tremendous difference. And this is bio individual, but 4 to 5 hours before bed, having their last bite of food. So it's really a significant amount of time to allow their body to digest, kind of lower their body temperature as a result of that kind of light fasting period. And then from that place, then they're not having to digest throughout the course of the night while they're sleeping. So that's another big one that we see, both helping to alleviate the difficulties falling asleep, but then also staying asleep. So those are a couple to begin, and just want to give you a second to share if there's any feedback before I keep going.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So, so true. I've had some clients as well as myself where the blood glucose monitors, and it's shocking what's happened in the middle of the night. and like you said, it's very biodividual. People have to test themselves because somebody's going to probably listen to this and go, okay, so do I eat before I go to bed, or I not eat before I go to bed? Because in this wellness and biohacking world, we're trained to leave 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed without food, and then here you go, you get somebody who that's me, is guy wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm like, it's my low blood glucose. I'm like, well, wait a second. Then that just kind of ruins the whole circadian clock. Like if I just eat a little something before I go to bed, I'm not going to do the fasting, or you get all worried about it. But in fact, for me personally, my health and some of my clients, well, you kind of do need to have something. And it's not to say eat a whole meal, but it's something I never thought about. And, you really would think, oh, well, we want to get in that fasting mode, but it's not for everybody. And particularly for women, and particularly for athletic women, or women who wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is go and exercise, and on this empty stomach, and your blood glucose levels are already quite low. So, you have to I love the blood glucose monitor experiment. I highly encourage everybody to do it. Maybe that's a reason why I've even myself noticed I wake up and I didn't notice while I was doing the glucose monitor, but I'm going to do it again. And I notice, I'm like, why am I awake? And it's not because something's on my mind. And you go, well, okay. And I notice I'm a little hungry, like not hungry, but like, kind of like, I think if somebody had food in front of me, I'd probably eat it. Like it's weird because you sleep and you're like, I'm not hungry, but I'm wondering if that little cue, it's very, very dull, but it's something where I think I'm wondering if I'm going hypoglycemic because I feel, is it my body waking me up because the glucose is levels down and saying, hey, you go to the fridge and eat something, right? Is that something you've seen in the experiments? Oh, wait, there's a delay. Did you get that? Because it seems like there's a delay.
Yes. Okay. So 100%. And I think you touched on a couple important points. Oh, hopefully. Oh, shoot. Hopefully you can hear me. Oh, you good? Okay, perfect. Yes. So absolutely. You touched on some really important points. One, um, fasting can be something that we don't want to kind of belittle the impact that that can make on our biology, particularly for women. And so certainly we want to be mindful that I think some people might be running away with this concept and seeing, oh, there's can be so many benefits from fasting, and then they can actually be creating some real problems. And particularly one of the first areas that seems to get impacted can be sleep when we are being a bit too aggressive in that area. So a couple things to be mindful of. One, you can do something called circadian rhythm intermittent fasting, which is meant to really be a softer, more gentle fasting, which is really just meant that you have a couple hours before bed in order so that you are not having to kind of digest throughout that process of sleep. Granted, I know it can be confusing because we just mentioned how if you are struggling, then we might try a little bit of those kind of uh, stabilizers throughout the course of the night, whether it's that raw honey, almond butter. Some people do like a hard boiled egg, different things to kind of stabilize. But intermittent circadian rhythm intermittent fasting is meant to be that you're really aligning with more of the rhythms of nature and along with the kind of blueprint of our hunter gatherer days. So you're more just eating largely closest to when the sun is out. So when the sun is out, then you're going to town. But then when the sun is setting, you're just aiming to just not eat too far into the evening to send those kind of counter, cues to the body is really the goal there. So it's things to explore and experiment with. And certainly, but if you are finding that you are in that very sympathetic state, we don't want to add any aggressive sort of other stressors to the body, like extreme fasting. Also, another reason that I see for wake ups that are still in this world of food is under eating throughout the course of the day, particularly for all genders, but also I do see that a lot with women that when they are under eating or exploring with very low carb diets, that all of these things can act as that kind of stressor, and then having more of those frequency of wake ups or difficulty falling asleep. So those in that realm of food, there's a lot for us to explore. So I'd really encourage people to do a bit of an audit of what are the types of foods you're eating, a breakdown of are you getting sufficient calories and what's the macro breakdown. And we don't need to get too in the weeds. When I say macro, it's just really, are you getting kind of sufficient split for you of kind of grounding carbs and kind of all is well response that tends to come from carbs? Are you getting a nice balance of that without then sending your glucose into a tailspin, which I know is quite the fine line to walk. So kind of doing an audit of that, as well as what are the times that you are eating this in. And what I want to say is if any of you are saying, oh, that's just so much to do, I really want to bring this back to the blueprint of kind of that ancestral health. And what we're thinking around that is just more, how can we align a bit more with the rhythms of nature so that in the past, what we would have only had access to would have been real foods throughout the course of the day during sunlight hours. Post sunset, maybe you had fire, and to kind of extend that was really the first biohack, but you could extend the days just a little bit with that fire. And then maybe you could eat a little bit more throughout the course of the night, maybe you got another hour or something. But much later past then, you really weren't delving into this kind of mindless snacking and what have you that we tend to be doing now. And it's very common for clients. I'll get on and we'll look at their sleep data, and then we'll be seeing that they were eating well into the early hours of the morning, and what that's doing is just sending us confusing kind of cues to the body. Those are known as zeitgebers or time givers. And that is just a counter effect to what we're looking to do. So it's consistent and front loaded as you can, getting your calories in throughout your course of your day. And really, that's the other thing that I will say is I see a lot of people skipping breakfast and then pushing out their fasting into late into the evening. And then they're getting the big mass bulk of their calories late to the night, which is a big process to digest all that. And again, I used to do all these things, by the way, so no shame in the game. But how can we front load that a bit more? Because that's how we would have been operating in the rhythms of nature, in alignment with those rhythms, for millions of years. And it's really hardwired in our biology at this point.
Such great points. I mean, these are simple hacks that we can use food and light to alter our circadian rhythms and really just experiment and try. And women, we need our carbs. Come on, like enough, because all this research is done on men and it seems to work for them. But
Right.
some women it does too, but just it's all very bio individual. So I know you're short on time. We've only got about 10 minutes left. And I have a billion and one questions. So I think we need a part two. But I
Yes.
want to open up to the panel because you guys who are here, you showed up. I know you have questions. And I'm sure your questions will be great because I probably wanted to ask them too. So please, anyone here who'd like to unmute, you can and start speaking, or you can type in the comments and I can ask for you. So shoot away, anyone. I mean, you don't be shy, but I don't want to put the pressure on you either. Hey, Nancy, there we go.
Hi, I'll start.
Yeah.
So my trainer is actually one of your is a presenter at the Biohacking conference coming up, Carol Covino. So I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And my question is, I'm encouraged to drink around 100 ounces of water a day. And so I try to get all of that in before, I got another hour. I try to get it in before around 4 p.m. my time. But so I'm a 5 or 6 time at night going to the restroom kind of gal.
Got it. Okay. So one, you're looking to manage all that water that you're drinking, completely hear that and acknowledge you for taking those steps to make sure you're properly hydrated, because that's another reason where we do see people having kind of lowered HRV throughout the course of the night because they are dehydrated. So the fact that sounds like that's not you, but you're going into the multiple 4 or 5 times a night. Is that right?
Yes.
Wake ups.
Yes.
Okay. So a couple things. One, I know we mentioned some of these reasons for wake ups, but that is so not the exhaustive list. And granted, we might, one of the things that we see is that when we wake up to go pee, we can sometimes then just assume, okay, this is a bladder issue. My goodness, I'm having to wake up and go pee so often. And there can be that element of, did we overdrink, kind of overconsume or what have you. So managing that, which it sounds like you're doing. But then there can be the other element of, are there other things that are waking us up or at the source point of the wake ups? And just by virtue of the fact that now we've been asleep for multiple hours, we do also need to pee. So that's part of the thing is it because of the bladder, or are there other things that could be at the effect of that? And now we're actually having to get up and what have you. So a couple things. And I did want to make sure that I touched on this because Zora, I know I mentioned sleep apnea. And now, Nancy, this might not apply to you, but I do want to make sure that I say it because it's so pervasive. And I think it's going to become the next big elements of this sleep revolution that we're in the midst of, is understanding that so many people are being missed in sleep apnea diagnosis, including women. I just got back from a conference at Stanford Medical, and they were really pointing to underserved population being slender women post 40, and that they're really trying to help target in on this group because they don't seem to meet the traditional rundown of what it would take of having sleep apnea, or what we might think of as having sleep apnea. So this group, what it can look like sometimes is in more the mild group. And sometimes these even say like REM dependent sleep apnea, which is one of the diagnoses of sleep apnea. There's many different types. But when I say that can be REM dependent sleep apnea, can be in the early morning hours. So when you're starting to transition into your REM sleep, and then suddenly now you're having difficulty breathing, and that is causing a wake up. And that might not even mean snoring, by the way. So if you're someone that says, well, I don't snore and what have you, I would just encourage so many people to at least do even the at-home sleep test, which many of you can get for about under $200, different price ranges and what have you. This is in America, but certainly even internationally, or get it covered under your insurance and go into a sleep lab or get an at home. So just checking that, because that has been a source point of a way, can be a tremendous lowering of wake ups throughout the course of the night for different individuals that do discover that. And then sometimes it might not even be sleep apnea, but sort of an upper airway resistance syndrome, which is looking at in between. So you're not in the mild, moderate, or severe realm of sleep apnea, but you're still having difficulty breathing. So then in the improvements of that, that can often make that difference. And Zora, I know we were talking about before, mouth taping. And so mouth taping can be another one that you could test, explore. Is there, right, exactly. She's got the mouth tape right there for anyone watching. So testing of that, if there is any of that breath related element at play. Now, so there's that. Now, in addition, one of the softer elements that I didn't really hit on was, I mentioned being sympathetic dominant, but there are periods in our life where we might be more sympathetic dominant or have a lot of stressors going on, where now we might be experiencing more fragmented sleep, and particularly at different parts of our cycle, if we are menstruating age too. So then we can have upticks in the amount of wake ups that we might have. And there can be multiple things at play. So we might be aging, we might have changes with hormones, having the upticks in wake ups, and maybe some of the breath related pieces. So you could explore, at least with that mouth tape, and do know, I want to be really responsible that that does not cure any elements of, sleep apnea or what have you. But if you do have some alleviations, that could be something to explore, and then certainly get further tested. So that is one. And then there are one of the other really common things that I do want to make sure I at least speak to, anxiety and depression, then causing more of the difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep. And then of course, alcohol and the timing of that, even if it's one drink, but it sounds like maybe Nancy, that might not apply to you. So all of those things in alignment with some of what we spoke to, but then we can get more in the physiological state. So physiologically, then getting those tests for, is there anything out of alignment as it relates to certain nutritional deficiencies? Are we looking at issues with B vitamins? It could be certainly the D vitamin conversation, which is so chronic for so many people, magnesium levels, thyroid. The list is really very exhaustive and very long on some of these things that could also be disrupting your sleep from a physiological standpoint. Then some more nuanced things. When I see people sleeping better when they leave their home, we can really be looking at some of the air quality in your space, mold in the space, or are there certain noises in your environment? So that's why we call sleep is a skill. That's why we call it this, because it is not so cut and dry. And anyone that just says, oh, well, it's because of this, I think is not doing their due diligence, because it really does take some sort of investigation. And we want to go into the top down, some of the most common, and then get to some of those more kind of insidious or lurking things that could be at play.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. And I wanted to check in real quick. Do any of those pop out at you, or does it still, or there's still a lot of question marks for you?
The mouth taping I've heard of.
Okay.
Could you guys put some links related to this podcast so that we can look at some of the products, like the at-home sleep test that you would recommend, and the mouth taping, the type? I mean, or is it just, Band-Aid?
Absolutely.
I don't know. But I do think the vitamin B, the B vitamin, the other levels I've been tested and they're fine. So yes, this gives me a starting point at least. So
okay, good. And we are committed to at sleepisaskill.com. We also have a sleep assessment that will kind of auto trigger back some resources based on what you're dealing with your sleep. And then we do a weekly newsletter and podcast too, to aim to provide some more free resources for people to go deeper. And from that place, we're also just launching a shop page too of some of the most common things that you can start to stack in to help support your sleep. And particularly, we're focusing in on wake ups as a area there.
Well, thank you. Thank you both.
Oh, well, yeah, well,
Awesome.
yeah, well, I'll send you an email follow up with some of the
Okay.
links. And then,
Thank you.
of course, we'll have everything in the show notes. I know you have to go, Molly. I'm so grateful that you're here. I still have a billion and one questions, but I think you gotten a great chock a block of stuff. If somebody wanted to work with you one on one and help them sort out their sleep issues, you do that, right?
Yes, absolutely. So, again, our aim and our mission is to really help transform the conversation around sleep on the planet. And so we're really aiming to get out as much information as possible. So we do that weekly newsletter, the podcast. And then if you're still really struggling and want to go deeper, 100%. So, one, we have group programs that we offer. And with those, as of right now in 2022, everyone wears an Aura ring with those. So you also have kind of the benefit of the observer effect to really know that you're being seen throughout that process of these behavioral change initiatives. So we do that. It's called Optimize Your Sleep. And then we also work one on one with people if they have a lot of layered things that they really want some kind of personalized attention on. But we are committed that even in the small groups too, that people are getting some of that personalized attention as well. But then as a group too, moving together to make some of these changes, experiment. So 100%, we want to help make sure that people have lots of resources in this journey to improve their sleep.
Oh, thank you so much. You've got the newsletter. People can go to sleepisaskill.com. You've got free PDFs that I'm going to send out as well in the email. You've got so much great free stuff. You got a YouTube channel. You're on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter. I'll have all the links. If you
Yeah.
search Sleep is a Skill or Molly McLaughlin, which is McGlocklin, and Mollie is your first name. I'll get it all out in the show notes, but you're everywhere.
Aw.
It's easy to find you. Before I let you go, I want to mention that we got connected because of the Biohacking Congress, and
Yes.
you are going to be at the one in Miami. Unfortunately, I won't be able to meet you at the one in Boston, which
I
is June
know.
11th and 12th. But definitely, if you are in the Boston area, tickets are free. If you want to
Yeah.
get online, there's a charge, but I think it's BOS 50 if you want 50% off of that. And Miami, I don't know, is there any, is it free in Miami? Do you know?
I think it is. Very good question. Because I know they're kind of reworking their model to help support getting as many people in as possible. So I know they're kind of in flux there. So I'll have to find out what the latest is. But certainly, if for anyone listening, absolutely take advantage of that offer for Boston. I've been at the last three and they were paid. So the fact that they're opening that up in Boston is a really cool opportunity. So definitely get yourself on over there. And I think, to be announced, I believe for Miami, or I can certainly do my due diligence to find that answer out.
Oh, thank you. That's biohackingcongress.com. Okay. Don't get that mixed up with some other conferences, right? Just
Yes.
biohackingcongress.com, June 11th and 12th in Boston. In Miami, it's going to be in October, I think. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you'll find that all on the site. So before I let you go, do you have any last words you'd like to share before you let you? Because I gotta have a part two because I want to talk about gadgets. I want to talk about
I
what's
know.
more techniques. But I think you did a lot of clearing up. But anything you'd like to say before I let you go?
Yeah. Well, one, I would just love to underscore that we really truly believe that sleep is a skill, and hoping that anyone listening can kind of pique their interest in this element of sleep, and piquing it from a place of how could I begin at kind of sleep 101 and maybe throw out all the things that we thought we knew about sleep, and really starting to learn intentionally about this area and this thing that we do a third of our life. We're talking on the average, around almost 30 years that we're actually in bed asleep, depending on your life expectancy and your on some of the averages. So this is a significant amount of time that we are doing this one thing, and let's ensure that we're really doing it to the best of our abilities, because of the fallout of what can come about on both a positive or a deleterious route if we are not prioritizing this. So thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity to kind of share about an area that I'm really, really passionate about. And thank you for the work that you're doing to really create this forum to help support people in this aging process that I think previously has just really been one where we've been more insular, doing it on our own. And instead, what can we learn together?
Oh, thank you so much, Molly. And thank you, everyone who's been listening. And I hope you have a good day, good night, good morning, wherever you
Yes.
are.